When I was 19, my sister quietly told me I was a disgrace to the family. Her voice was low, but her words cut deep. A week later, my father changed the locks without a word. My mother left a bag of my clothes on the front steps. No note, no explanation, just silence. They said I was unstable, too emotional, irresponsible. But the truth? I simply refused to stay silent about what they'd done. I vanished for 15 years, changed my name, cut my hair, erased everything that could tie me to who I used to be, not out of shame, but because I knew if they saw me succeed, they'd try to destroy it. Then one day I walked into a courtroom. My sister sat at the defendant's table. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The judge paused, narrowed his eyes toward the back, and asked, "Is that Governor Camille Reyes?" Every head turned. My sister's jaw dropped. And in that suspended second, the silence they buried me under finally shattered. They used to call me a failure. Now, the only sound louder than their silence was the world recognizing me for who I am. Before I share what comes next, I'd love it if you dropped a hello in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. It reminds me that this story reaches people far beyond the walls that once tried to hold me in. If you feel even a flicker of connection with my story, hit that subscribe button. There's more to come. Thank you. Now, let me begin. The air in San Antonio hung heavy with summer heat. Inside the Reyes household, it was heavy with unspoken expectations. The family sat around a polished dining table, its surface catching the soft light of the chandelier overhead. It was Sunday dinner, a ritual Manuel Reyes maintained with the strictness of a soldier. Manuel sat at the head of the table, the retired police chief, the patriarch, the unwavering enforcer of what he believed to be right. He lifted his glass toward the television, where his eldest daughter, Isabella, appeared in a silent news segment. "That's my daughter," he said with pride. District Attorney for Bagar County. Featured on CNN, a true Reyes. At the opposite end of the table sat Camille, her fork hovering over untouched food, eyes fixed on the plate in front of her. No one looked in her direction. No one mentioned her graduation. Just last week, she had quietly crossed the stage, with a degree in humanities, not in law or medicine, the paths they had once mapped out for her. She hadn't shared the ceremony date. She knew they wouldn't come. She had always been the outlier. Sketchbooks instead of legal files? Her backpack filled with books by Rilke and Simone Weil. She painted parks at sunrise and read philosophy under trees. At family dinners, she sat like a ghost, present but fading. She was 23, full of brilliance they neither recognized nor tried to understand. Then the storm hit. It started with a text, then another, a voicemail she didn't dare play. By the time she opened her laptop, the damage had already been done. A private video, taken without her knowing, had been leaked. Her face, her voice, her body, exposed, stolen, shared. The one responsible? Her ex-boyfriend, angry, spiteful, punishing her for leaving him. She never even knew he'd kept the video. She didn't have time to cry. Her life unraveled too quickly. Isabella saw it first. Camille found out later. Her sister had forwarded the link straight to their father, along with a single sentence. "You need to handle this before it gets worse." Not to defend Camille, but to protect the family's name. Dinner was canceled that night. Manuel burst into her room, rage clinging to him like heat. "This is what we raised you for?" he shouted. "So the whole world could see you like that?" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. "I didn't post it," Camille whispered. "I was the one violated." "You disgraced the Reyes name," he snapped, throwing her diploma onto the bed like it was something worthless. "If that's the life you want, go live it. But not under this roof. Not with our name. Not with our money." Her mother, Teresa, stood quietly in the doorway, rosary wrapped tight in her hand. She said nothing. Didn't even meet Camille's eyes. Camille turned toward Isabella, searching her face for even a flicker of empathy. There was none, just cold silence and folded hands. She packed in quiet, a few clothes, her sketchbooks, her notebooks, the red backpack she'd carried since freshman year. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, cutting the room into strips of light and dark. When she reached the living room, Manuel was waiting. He placed her bank card on the table. "Don't call. Don't write." Her mother watched from behind the curtain as Camille stepped into the burning evening air. She didn't say goodbye, didn't wave, just stared. The first week, Camille slept in a friend's car. By the 7th day, that welcome had faded. She boarded a Greyhound bus, headed north. To Denver, maybe. Or somewhere smaller. Somewhere she could disappear. Somewhere no one would care who she used to be. On the second night of that journey, beneath an overpass just outside Santa Fe, Camille did something small and final. She took out an old leather-bound notebook, one that held family birthdays, home recipes, notes her mother used to leave in her lunchbox. She tore each page slowly and fed them to a small flame until there was nothing left but ashes. The night was still, the flames soft and hungry. Camille stared into the glow, then turned to the rearview mirror of the bus idling behind her. She saw her reflection, tired, betrayed, burning, and she whispered, "I've got nothing left to lose, so I'll start with what's left of me." Denver was gray that winter, and the cold had a way of crawling through clothes, skin, and whatever hope Camille had left. She lived in a shared apartment, one of those run-down buildings with peeling paint, rust-stained sinks, and thin walls that coughed every sound into your bones. Rent was cheap, heat unreliable. Her room was barely wide enough for a mattress, a folding table, and one cracked mirror, but it was hers. Camille worked constantly. In the mornings, she served pancakes at a diner off Fax Avenue, memorizing orders and names she'd forget the moment she clocked out. In the afternoons, Camille mopped the hallways of a small neighborhood clinic, floors that still held the echoes of sneezes, scuffed shoes, and the quiet weight of unspoken worry. When evening came, she shifted to a second job, entering data for a faceless logistics firm, tapping keys on a borrowed keyboard. No one there knew her full name. She preferred it that way. At night, when the world finally stilled and the quiet felt heavy in her chest, she wrote, not full sentences, but cryptic fragments in a language she'd invented as a child. It was her way of bleeding quietly, of speaking without being heard. Each page became a confession she couldn't voice. Sometimes she painted, though rarely. Supplies were costly. One night, after a punishing shift, she used an old toothbrush and a few tubes of cheap acrylic paint to create an abstract figure unraveling into its own shadow. She hung it behind the curtain in her room. No one asked what it was. That seemed fitting. Then came the scissors. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror and cut her hair. The strands fell into the sink like wilted petals. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. A letting go. She registered under a new name at the job center, Cam R. Just enough to disappear. Just enough to begin again. One night, while cleaning during an overnight shift at the clinic, she heard raised voices. Stepping into the hallway, she saw a frightened woman clinging to her child. A uniformed officer loomed over her, thrusting a stack of papers in her face. "Firma aquí," he barked. "It's already processed. Just sign." The woman looked overwhelmed, paralyzed by fear or confusion. Camille stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but inside her chest, her heart pounded. "She's not signing that," she said. The officer narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" "She's not signing," Camille repeated, taking the paper. "Your system's outdated. These documents aren't valid." It wasn't true, but the officer paused, muttered, then turned and walked away. The woman wept softly into her daughter's coat. Later that week, Camille was called into a small office. She expected to be reprimanded or fired. Instead, she was met by a man named Rafael Delgado, director of Procto Libe, a nonprofit assisting undocumented immigrants. "Most people wouldn't have stepped in," he said. "I know," Camille replied. "Most people still have something to lose." He smiled. "Come work for us, not as a cleaner." And so she did. She started small, fetching coffee, helping with translations, running errands. But she paid attention. She listened. She studied. Soon she was drafting outreach proposals, managing paperwork for emergency services, and assisting with funding requests. She enrolled in online classes at night, read immigration law on weekends, and began sitting in on city meetings, not to speak, but to understand the rules of influence. She stopped using the word home, at least not out loud. Then one day, after helping secure housing for a family fleeing cartel violence, a young intern turned to her and asked, "Why do you do all this?" Camille didn't hesitate. "I don't have a family to go back to," she said. "So I'm building a place where I might belong." And somewhere in the rhythm of doing good while staying unseen, she began to breathe again. 3 years after the night she tore a deportation, notice from a mother's trembling hands, Camille stood inside a wood-paneled City Hall chamber. Her voice, low and steady, carried through the room like a distant storm. By now, she was well known in Denver's immigrant advocacy circles, fierce, focused, and clear-eyed. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. When Camille spoke, people listened, even those who disagreed with her. She wasn't just the woman who once scrubbed clinic floors. Now she sat on the city's Immigration Policy Advisory Council. No motorcade, no spotlight. But real influence, the kind that rewrites rules before anyone notices they've changed. That day's meeting was tense. A conservative councilman, his suit pressed crisp and his jaw tight, was pushing for increased cooperation with ICE and local shelters. Camille waited silently at the end of the table for him to finish. Then she leaned forward, her voice steady. "If the law refuses to grow with justice," she said, "then justice stops being lawful and starts being ornamental." The room went quiet. A few people clapped. The councilman didn't respond. Afterward, a journalist from the Rocky Mountain Chronicle approached her in the hallway. Young, eager, sharp-eyed. "We'd love to do a piece on you," he said. "Local leader, immigrant advocate, the face of change, that kind of thing." Camille blinked. Something in her stomach turned. "Only if you don't use my full name," she said. He looked puzzled. "But no headshot and you can call me C. Reese." He paused, then nodded. "Okay, why the secrecy?" Camille smiled politely, but her eyes didn't. "I've already been seen in the wrong ways." That night, back in her small studio apartment, no longer the crumbling place she first landed in, but still modest, she lit a candle. She did this every night, always in front of the same photograph. It had once been a family photo, but her own face had been scratched away with the edge of a coin. What remained was a pale smudge where her smile had been, a soft absence. Each night, before extinguishing the flame on her bedside candle, she murmured the same words like a quiet prayer. "Be remembered for your actions, not for the names they gave you." Sometimes she wondered if her mother still had pictures of her, or if her father ever mentioned her name out loud, but she never searched for them online, never scrolled through their profiles. The distance wasn't a wound, it was a boundary, a deliberate one. Healing, she'd come to learn, wasn't always about forward motion. Sometimes it meant planting yourself behind high walls and letting something new take root in private. One afternoon, Marion, a colleague at Procto, Libé and a seasoned woman who'd spent over 20 years navigating city politics, looked at Camille over her glasses and asked gently, "Ever think about letting people know the full story? Who you really are?" Camille gave a half smile. "They know who I am? I mean, before all this." Camille shook her head. "I'm not hiding," she said. "I'm just not ready to be visible to people who never saw me to begin with." But the truth ran deeper. What she feared wasn't being discovered. It was being misread. Turned into a symbol, a headline, a simplified version of a much more complicated truth. She wanted her voice to carry, not her history. Still, change has a way of finding even those who try to stay quiet. A few weeks later, she stood behind a simple podium at a small community event in a public park. The crowd wasn't massive, maybe 70 people, but their eyes were on her. And when Camille announced she was running as an independent for the Colorado State House of Representatives, her voice held steady. "I'm not here for a party," she said. "I'm here for the ones who are never given a seat, but who hold the whole table up." She didn't mention where she came from. She didn't talk about sleeping in her car or being estranged from her family. There were no polished photos, no stories designed to soften the edges. Her campaign was built on clear policies, plain language, and one simple line that stood in place of a smile: "Let the work speak first." And just like that, Camille entered a different kind of battle. Not only for others, but for herself. For the right to build something new without asking for approval. For the right to move forward without explaining the past. And to be seen only when she chose to be. It started as a headline Camille hadn't expected to see. District Attorney under investigation for evidence tampering. The name below was all too familiar. Isabella Reyes. Camille hadn't said that name out loud in years. Hadn't allowed it to live in her mouth. But there it was, printed in bold, unavoidable. The story broke over a weekend. A whistleblower accused Isabella of manipulating evidence in an immigration trial involving a mother from Honduras facing deportation. Some called it a miscarriage of justice. Others labeled it a political witch hunt. Whatever the spin, the consequences were real. Potential disbarment, criminal charges, maybe even prison time. For Camille, it felt like the echo of an explosion. Distant, but heavy enough to rattle something inside her. Her communications team acted fast. "We suggest staying neutral," one advisor warned. "You're the sitting governor. This could spiral." Another added, "It's not your battle. Let it run its course." But Camille didn't see it that way. Not because she felt any duty to defend Isabella, absolutely not. It was the ghosts gathering inside that courtroom that pulled her in. One of them, after all, carried her name. Without telling anyone, she booked a flight to San Antonio. No press release, no security escort, no trail. She arrived at the courthouse in plain black trousers, a simple coat and dark sunglasses. She slipped in through a side entrance and settled into the last row, where the shadows were thicker and the questions quieter. The courtroom had a cold, sterile feel. Lawyers shuffled binders. Reporters murmured into discreet recorders. At the front sat Isabella, composed as ever, impeccable, upright, lips pursed in that same line. Camille remembered from years past, controlled, untouched. But Camille noticed the tightness in her knuckles. Then came the judge. Audrey Jameson entered the chamber. Camille recalled her from a national governor's summit, a sharp-minded, no-nonsense woman who didn't suffer fools. The judge scanned the room as always. Her gaze landed on the back row. A beat, then another. "Wait, is that Camille Reyes? The governor?" Whispers surged like wind through tall grass. Heads swiveled. A few reporters gasped. Cameras turned. One flash, then another. At the front, Isabella turned suddenly, her gaze snapping toward the gallery. Her eyes, once so quick to dismiss Camille, now widened with shock. Beside her, Teresa Reyes went pale, her hand clutching her chest. Whether she whispered a prayer or a curse, no one could tell. Manuel Reyes leaned forward, squinting as if to make sure what he saw wasn't just memory playing tricks. A daughter exiled by name but now standing in quiet power. Camille didn't blink. She didn't nod, didn't move. She simply sat, shoulders square, presence unshaken, as if just being there said everything that needed to be said. And it did. The judge cleared her throat, composed herself, and the proceedings resumed. But the air never quite settled after that. Every few minutes, someone stole a glance back. The governor was in the room and she wasn't there to save anyone. Photographers clicked without shame. One tried to get closer until a bife waved him back. Camille ignored them. She had come to witness, not to interfere, not to offer comfort, not even to speak. She stayed until the adjournment, then rose from her seat and walked out the side door the same way she came. No one called after her. No one followed. By the time she returned to her hotel, her phone was already buzzing with missed calls, texts, and voicemails from press outlets she hadn't heard from in years. Her face was on the news. Her name was trending. This time, it wasn't scandal or regret that brought her back. It was intention. That night, Camille sat by the window, watching the flickering lights of a city that once held all her firsts. Her reflection no longer looked like a ghost, but something real, solid, undeniable. She hadn't returned as a daughter. Not as a sibling. She was there as a reckoning. It took less than a day for her presence in that courtroom to take over headlines across the country. The story broke open like a sealed vault. News outlets pounced, each pushing their own narrative. Colorado governor's hidden past, a strange sister of disgraced attorney, from scandal to stateswoman, the forgotten Reyes, Camille, the family's real legacy? Then the true storm arrived. Someone resurfaced the video, grainy, faded, but unmistakable. Camille at 23, a rental house, a boy with a camera and too much entitlement. The internet had found her again. Headlines turned harsh. Talk shows debated her character. One even invited her ex-boyfriend, who offered a sheepish grin. "We were young," he said. "She knew I had it. I didn't think it would blow up like this." Camille watched the segment alone in her office. Her hands didn't twitch. Her face didn't shift. She didn't reach for the phone or demand spin control. She let it play. She let it burn. Because she was done hiding. Her staff panicked. Should we respond? "We can issue a cease and desist. We could threaten legal action." She told them no. "Let them watch," she whispered. "I've been seen before. And I survived." Then the call came. Manuel Reyes, his voice still sharp with authority, cut through the line like it always had. Like she was a teenager again, being lectured for wearing lipstick too dark. "You're dragging our name through the dirt," he said. "Using it for attention. For your own gain." Camille leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "I've carried that name longer than you carried me," she said quietly. "I didn't ask to be a Reyes. I stayed one to remember what not to become." He hung up. That night, Teresa Reyes was hospitalized after a spike in blood pressure. Camille found out from a soft-voiced cousin in San Antonio. Despite everything in her telling her not to, she caught a red-eye flight. No cameras. No announcement. No explanations. She stepped into the hospital room silently. Her mother looked small beneath the pale blanket. Not the rigid woman who once insisted. Camille speak softly and smile wider, but fragile. Mortal. Her hands trembled under the thin sheet. Their eyes met. "Camille," Teresa whispered, voice thin and wavering, like a thread about to snap. Camille didn't move. "If what they say is true," her mother's voice cracked, "then I spent years not seeing you." Tears welled in Teresa's eyes, but Camille didn't cry. She sat beside her, took her mother's hand, not seeking forgiveness, not offering it either. Just being. She didn't say, "I forgive you." That would have been too simple, too clean. Camille had learned healing doesn't always come with ceremony. Sometimes it just is. When Teresa fell asleep, Camille reached into her bag and pulled out a small canvas. She placed it on the table beside the hospital bed. A woman stood alone in a vast desert. Her shadow stretched long and misshapen behind her. It was titled Witness. Camille left without a word. Back in Colorado, the media chaos hadn't settled. Reporters lingered outside her building. Pundits speculated. Cameras waited. But Camille didn't issue a single statement. She didn't tweet. She didn't pose. And she didn't run. At the next cabinet meeting, she walked in calm as ever. Her team looked tight with nerves. The room was thick with held breath. She stepped to the podium. "I'm not here to rewrite history," she said clearly, "but I will decide how it's carried forward." Then she opened the meeting. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. That silence, earned and unshakable, spoke louder than anything written about her. Then came the news. Isabella Reyes, once Texas's golden prosecutor, had officially been indicted for evidence tampering in a major immigration case. Legal institutions that once celebrated her fell quiet, distancing themselves with rehearsed statements. Troubling allegations. Breach of public trust. The kind of language used when power falls from grace. Camille watched from her office, expression unreadable. Then her phone lit up. It was her mother. Teresa's voice was faint, quivering like wind brushing against brittle leaves. "Mija," she said, already crying. "Please, just come home. Just once, just for dinner." Camille didn't respond right away. Later that evening, another message arrived. This one from Manuel. No phone call. No voicemail. Just a simple text. "We need to talk." 15 years. 15 years of silence. Of pretending she was a ghost. And now suddenly they all remembered her number. Against every instinct, Camille said yes. That Friday, just before sunset, She pulled up to the Reyes home. The porch seemed smaller now, as if time had folded it inward. Inside, everything gleamed with forced warmth. Furniture polished to a shine, the air heavy with lemon oil and restrained tension. They were all there. Teresa opened the door with a trembling smile, mascara already blurred beneath her eyes. Manuel stood a step behind her, stiff in a crisp shirt still creased from the iron. At the far end of the table sat Isabella, eyes down, fingers nervously twisting a cloth napkin. The seat left for Camille was the same one she used as a girl, but now reupholstered, tight leather stretched over wood that still creaked beneath the surface, shiny, covered, but still cracked beneath. The meal was excessive. Enchiladas with red sauce, warm tortillas, a bottle of wine no one poured. Teresa tried to keep the conversation alive with soft, brittle memories. "Do you remember how you used to doodle on the napkins?" she asked, voice bright in a way that felt rehearsed. Manuel chimed in. "Your campaign posters looked very official. I read one of your speeches the other day. Quite good." Camille stayed quiet, watching, measuring, weighing the room. Eventually, Isabella spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I screwed up," she said. I didn't think it would ever come to this." And there it was. Then came the turn. "We were thinking," Teresa began, reaching slightly toward Camille's hand, but stopping herself. "Maybe you could speak to the federal prosecutor. Just a word. Nothing official. Just help. For the family." Camille scanned their faces. Her mother, eyes wet, clinging to hope like a child refusing to let go of a worn-out blanket. Her father, composed but calculated, his tone soft, but his gaze sharp. At Isabella, once the architect of her exile, now reduced to silent desperation. She put her fork down slowly. The click echoed like a judge's gavel. "If I weren't the governor," Camille asked, voice level and unblinking, "would I still be your blood?" No one spoke. The silence was deafening. She stood up. The air felt lighter the moment she pushed back the chair. The new leather squeaked. "I kept your name," she said softly, "but I built my life without you in it." She turned, coat brushing her calves as she walked to the door. Teresa called out, voice cracking, "Camille, please." But Camille didn't look back. She stepped outside into the night air, crisp, dry, and clear. For the first time, she didn't carry the weight of that house with her. Only her own. The text came at 3:12 a.m. Camille woke with a start. Her phone buzzed again. One image, then another, then a flood. Grainy screenshots of the old spring break video. Private email exchanges from her early 20s. A photo of her crying outside. A Denver shelter in year 1. No caption, no sender. She stared at the screen in the dark, pulse steady. Not fear, just calculation. By 9 a.m., her communications director knocked on her office door, pale-faced. "We've got something," she said, sliding a tablet across Camille's desk. There it was again, a blog post already circulating with the headline, "The real Camille leaked files from the governor's past." She didn't flinch. At noon, a discreet call came through from an old friend, now stationed in the Justice Department. "You didn't hear it from me," the voice said. "But your father's been asking questions, background vetting." Someone whispered, "He's trying to find leverage." Camille closed her eyes for a beat, then opened them with focus sharper than glass. This wasn't concern. It was warning, or worse, a soft threat. That evening, instead of waiting for the storm to reach her doorstep, Camille walked straight into it. The next morning, she stood before a podium in Denver. No flags behind her. No security detail flanking her shoulders, just her. A wall of artwork from immigrant children she'd helped over the years. And a single white spotlight. She wore a crisp white blazer, no jewelry, clean lines, her hair tucked behind her ears. A woman unarmed but untouchable. "We've all seen how power works," she began. "It doesn't always come in the form of violence or laws. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in reminders of who your father is, in threats disguised as family dinners." She paused. "Well, this bill is for anyone who's ever had their past used against them by people who were supposed to protect them." She introduced the Justice Witness Protection Bill, a proposal to criminalize any attempt to manipulate public figures, whistleblowers, or officials through familial pressure. past relationships, or reputation threats. It was bold, personal, and unmistakably pointed. She didn't name names, but every outlet knew. Every lawmaker knew. Every member of the Reyes family knew. The media exploded again, but this time they weren't dragging her. They stood behind her. Editorials praised the bill as long overdue. Op-eds commended her poise in the face of generational intimidation. Headlines shifted. Governor Reyes redefends political armor. She fought her family. Now she fights for the silenced. Manuel Reyes silent. Teresa, no calls. Isabella, no texts, no reach-outs, no one dared. Camille walked the streets of Denver later that week like any other citizen. No reporters in tow. No cameras following her. Just a quiet woman in a navy coat, coffee in hand, crossing 14th and Bananic under the soft golden light of fall. No one stopped her. No one called her name. And she smiled. I like it this way, she thought, because I don't need to be remembered to keep doing what no one else dares to. It was just past noon when Camille's assistant gently knocked. Ma'am, Isabella Reyes is in the lobby. Camille looked up from her notes. Did she make an appointment? Number she just asked to see you alone. There was a pause, a long one. Camille nodded once. Send her in. She cleared the desk of everything but a single glass of water. No cameras, no aides, no security. When Isabella entered, she looked like a shadow of the woman from courtrooms past. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes, a plain blouse and jeans, and shoulders that barely held themselves up. Camille said nothing. The silence grew thick, an old silence familiar but long buried. Isabella sat down across from her. I didn't know how to start, she said quietly, but I know I ruined what we could have had as sisters before. I even realized I was jealous of you. Her voice broke, but she kept speaking. I don't want to go to prison, but I'm not here to ask you to fix it. I just wanted to tell you the truth. I stepped on you to climb higher, and now I look up. And you're somewhere I can't even see the ceiling of. Camille watched her, calm, unreadable. You didn't destroy me, Isabella, she said evenly. You just forgot I existed. And when someone is forgotten long enough, they remember how to become unforgettable. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks. Mom still believes you'll save me. Camille turned her head slightly, looking out the tall windows of her office at the city beyond. I'm not here to save anyone, she said. I saved myself so no one could drown me again. Isabella nodded slowly, her voice softened. Thank you for not hating me more than I deserve. Camille didn't reply. There was no hug, no forgiveness, no final embrace, just an honest silence between two women who once shared a room, a bloodline, and years of invisible damage. As Isabella stood to leave, her hand brushed the edge of Camille's desk. There, nearly hidden beneath a folder, lay a piece of paper, an unsigned letter, a plea for clemency. Camille had once written, and burned that very morning after remembering. A different kind of call from 15 years ago, one where a sister had whispered to their father, "She's the one in the video." The door clicked shut behind Isabella. Camille sat back down, opened the next draft of her judicial reform package, and began to write again. Some legacies, she thought, can't be rewritten, but they can end with you. The conference was unlike anything Camille had ever spoken at before. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic, but it was a room full of silenced history waiting to exhale. A statewide gathering on family justice reform, panels on whistleblowers who had exposed corruption within corporations, political institutions, and most painfully within families, survivors who had once been daughters, sons, partners, employees, all punished not for lying, but for telling the truth too close to home. Camille stood backstage watching as the final introductory video played. A montage of faces blurred for safety, voices disguised, captions recounting betrayals by fathers, husbands, bosses, blood. The moderator introduced her simply. Governor Camille Reyes, advocate, reformer, daughter. She stepped forward into a quiet that hummed with weight. Her voice was steady from the start. I was once called a disgrace, she began. Then I was erased. Then I was threatened. Not with guns, but with memories. People leaned in. I'm not here to make anyone apologize to me. I'm here so that my future children won't feel like loving. Their truth means betraying their bloodline. She paused, scanning the crowd. Her eyes landed briefly on her mother. Teresa sat in the second row, older, smaller somehow. Her hands clasped tightly. She didn't speak, but tears streamed silently down her face. Farther back, almost hidden by shadows, sat Manuel. No suit, no badge, just a man in a plain shirt, arms crossed over his chest like a shield that no longer worked. Isabella wasn't there, but in the front row, an empty seat bore a single printed sign reserved for who she once hoped to be. Camille smiled at the subtle gasps that rippled through the room. Then came the twist. "I'd like to announce a new policy," she said. "It's called the Public Kinship Act, or what I call the Family Transparency Clause. Under the new legislation, public employees would be allowed to declare familial relationships that posed a conflict of interest, without fear of retaliation, demotion, or being branded disloyal. It was a way to protect whistleblowers, not just from strangers, but from those who shared their DNA. Because silence, Camille said, should not be the price of belonging." The press caught on like wildfire. Finally, some headlines read, "A leader who names the wound before it furs." The speech was streamed live across the country. Some applauded, some cried, some called it too personal for politics. But for once, no one called her the disgraced sister of a disgraced prosecutor. Not anymore. As Camille stepped down from the stage, there were no bouquets, no roaring ovation, only a steady, quiet sense that she had unearthed something buried and offered it back as something new. She no longer needed to discard the name Reyes. Instead, she had reshaped its meaning. Half a year later, Camille walked into a modest community center in South Denver. There were no reporters, no cameras, no formal announcements, just a circle of about 40 folding chairs and a handful of residents. Expecting another routine nonprofit panel on leadership, no one anticipated the governor herself to appear, dressed in jeans, a soft gray cardigan, and without an entourage. She didn't head to the front right away. Instead, she helped rearrange chairs, poured herself a cup of coffee, and greeted people with the ease of someone who belonged, not as a guest, but as part of the room. When it came time for her to speak, she stepped forward without fanfare. No slides, no title flashed behind her, just 3 words written in chalk on a blackboard. "Relentless leadership," Camille began, her voice low but deliberate. "People often ask me, how did you manage without your family backing you?" She paused. "I didn't. I just stopped waiting for them to show up." A ripple of laughter moved through the room, gentle but genuine. "We don't get to choose our blood," she went on, "but we do get to decide which legacies we carry, and just as importantly, which ones we finally put down." From the audience, a woman in her 50s lifted her hand. Her hair was streaked with gray, her posture worn by life. "But what if someday," she asked, "they really change? What if they come back different?" Camille tilted her head, thoughtful. "Then I'll listen to the story they want to tell," she answered, calm and steady. "But I've already told mine, and I won't rewrite it." A stillness settled over the room, the kind that comes when a truth lands somewhere. That's when she saw him. Manuel stood at the back near the wall. No polished suit, no stern look, just an aging man, watching his daughter from the edge of a world he never helped her build. She continued speaking, her voice unwavering, her gaze steady. Their eyes met briefly. There was no bitterness, no pride, just clarity. When the gathering ended, the applause came, not out of formality but out of recognition. As the crowd began to thin, Manuel made his way slowly toward the front. Few noticed him, no cameras focused, no murmurs stirred. When it was his turn at the microphone, Camille remained still, her expression unreadable. "I never truly understood my daughter," he said, taking a deep breath. "But today I realize maybe I don't need to. Maybe all I have to do is acknowledge that she accomplished what I never could. And in that moment I finally see her. No apologies, no justifications, just those words." Camille didn't shed a tear. She didn't rush into his arms. Instead, she bowed her head, a quiet act filled with peace, not defeat. Outside, the first snowflakes began to drift down. Nearby, children dashed through the frozen park, laughter ringing as they chased one another across the playground. Stepping into the gentle white glow, Camille didn't look back or wave goodbye. She simply moved forward, alone, but not lonely, through the stillness of early winter. Once she had lived just to be noticed. Now she had finally learned to see herself. The hardest struggles are often those fought silently within, wrestling with the weight of what came before. Healing doesn't mean rewriting the past. It means choosing not to carry it any longer. We don't decide our origins, but we do decide where we stand. And sometimes, standing alone is the first step towards something unbreakable. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And if you want to join me on this journey again, hit subscribe and stay close. Thank you for being here.